The political landscape in the United States took another dramatic turn in early 2025 when President Donald Trump ordered the Department of Justice, DOJ, under the leadership of Pam Bondi to initiate a series of sweeping changes. These orders had immediate repercussions, causing shockwaves through the political and legal communities. The news of Trump's intervention in the DOJ wasn't exactly a surprise to those familiar with his aggressive stance on the justice system. However, the scale of these directives was unlike anything seen before. Pam Bondi, a former Florida Attorney General and a staunch ally of Trump, had been appointed as the Attorney General of the United States just a few months prior. Her appointment was met with mixed reactions. Supporters saw her as a tough, no-nonsense leader who would ensure the DOJ aligned with the president's agenda. Critics, however, feared that her appointment would further politicize the DOJ, undermining its core function of serving as an independent body that upholds the rule of law. The first major move came shortly after Bondi's confirmation when President Trump, through a formal directive, ordered her to lead a sweeping review of the department's operations. Bondi, known for her close ties to the Trump family, wasted no time in making her mark. Among her first acts was the restructuring of several key divisions within the DOJ with an emphasis on focusing on cases and investigations that were perceived as politically motivated or biased against the Trump administration. The response from Democrats was swift and furious. They saw these actions as a blatant attempt to transform the DOJ into a tool for partisan warfare, undermining its independence. Many expressed concerns that this would set a dangerous precedent as it could embolden future administrations to manipulate the DOJ for their own political gain. The timing of these developments couldn't have been more significant. As the country prepared for the 2024 presidential election, the DOJ's credibility and impartiality were under intense scrutiny. Any hint of political interference in legal matters could shake public trust in the system. One of the first targets of these changes was the ongoing investigation into former President Trump's business dealings. The investigation had been seen by many as an attempt to discredit Trump and his family, but supporters argued that it was necessary to ensure transparency and accountability. With Bondi at the helm of the DOJ, the investigation was reassigned to a special task force created to oversee high-profile cases involving prominent political figures. Bondi, in her public statements, emphasized that the DOJ would prioritize cases based on merit, not political considerations. But many weren't buying it. Critics argued that this move, while dressed in legal rhetoric, was simply a way to shut down investigations that could hurt Trump's public image, especially as the 2024 election drew closer. As Trump's orders continued to reverberate through the halls of the DOJ, the political climate grew increasingly tense. Pam Bondi, now firmly in control of the department, quickly moved forward with one of the most controversial decisions of her tenure, intervening in a high-profile case involving New York City Mayor Eric Adams. The case had initially attracted significant attention due to allegations of corruption within the mayor's office. It was a major investigation that seemed poised to deliver a significant blow to the administration of one of the most powerful figures in the Democratic Party. However, in a stunning move, Attorney General Bondi ordered the dismissal of all charges against Mayor Adams. This came despite the mounting evidence and ongoing investigation into his ties with several controversial business deals. For many, this was a clear sign that the DOJ was no longer an impartial institution but a politically motivated tool of the Trump administration. The backlash was immediate. Congressional Democrats and liberal commentators seized on the dismissal as proof of the DOJ's growing partisanship under Bondi's leadership. They argued that the move was a direct attempt to protect the mayor, who was an ally of several top Democratic figures, and prevent the scandal from affecting the Democratic Party's reputation. Legal analysts and former DOJ officials expressed deep concerns over the decision. Many of them saw it as a blatant overreach by the executive branch, undermining the independence of the judiciary and the department tasked with upholding the law. "This is not how justice is supposed to work," said Mark Fielding, a former assistant U.S. attorney. "When you start interfering with investigations because of political considerations, you erode the very foundation of the rule of law." Bondi, however, defended her decision, stating that the case against Mayor Adams lacked sufficient merit to proceed. She claimed that the dismissal was based on the facts and not any outside influence, but this explanation did little to quell the growing chorus of criticism. Democrats in Congress were furious, calling for hearings to investigate the integrity of the DOJ under Bondi's leadership. What made matters worse was that several senior officials within the DOJ resigned in protest. One of them, Thomas O'Reilly, who had worked as a prosecutor for nearly 2 decades, stated publicly that he could no longer work in an environment where political interference dictated legal decisions. His resignation, along with the departure of other experienced prosecutors, was seen as further evidence of the DOJ's politicization. While the Trump administration maintained that the dismissals were routine and justified, the optics were undeniably damaging. Bondi's actions had effectively turned what should have been a straightforward investigation into a highly charged political controversy. And as the media circus surrounding the dismissal intensified, the public's trust in the DOJ continued to erode. The dismissal of charges against Mayor Eric Adams was just the beginning of a broader campaign by Pam Bondi to reshape the Department of Justice, DOJ. In the months that followed, the public saw a dramatic shift within the department as Bondi took aim at DOJ officials, whom she considered loyal to the old regime. Many of these officials had been involved in high-profile investigations that were seen as unfavorable to Trump, and their sudden reassignment or removal further fueled accusations of political interference. Reports began to surface that the DOJ was undergoing a massive purge of staff, many of whom were experienced attorneys who had served the department for years. This wasn't just a handful of officials leaving. Rather, it was a systematic overhaul of the department's ranks, with Bondi's team installing new, more politically aligned figures in key positions. For critics, this was further evidence of the department's transformation into a political arm of the Trump administration. One of the most high-profile resignations came from Elizabeth Oyer, a seasoned DOJ attorney who had spent over 20 years handling some of the department's most complex cases. Oyer had been the chief pardon attorney under the previous administration, and she was known for her commitment to ensuring that pardon decisions were made independently of political considerations. However, in early 2025, Oyer was abruptly removed from her position, and she later accused the DOJ leadership of corruption and political retaliation. In an emotional testimony before Congress, Oyer detailed the internal pressures she faced after refusing to recommend pardoning controversial figures with ties to Trump. She alleged that her dismissal was in retaliation for her refusal to grant a pardon to actor Mel Gibson, a well-known Trump supporter who had been involved in a high-profile legal battle over firearms possession. Oyer's testimony revealed an inner world of strained loyalty and political pressure within the DOJ that was previously unseen by the public. "This is not the Department of Justice I worked for," Oyer testified, visibly shaken. "The decision-making is no longer about justice, it's about loyalty to the president. I couldn't be part of that." Her testimony was a stark reminder of the extent to which the DOJ had been politicized, and it led to renewed calls for investigations into Bondi's leadership. The political ramifications were immediate. Democrats in Congress demanded a full investigation into the DOJ's actions under Bondi. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi both issued public statements condemning the purging of DOJ officials, calling it an attack on the integrity of the legal system. "The DOJ is not the personal plaything of a president," Pelosi stated. "We cannot allow the rule of law to be compromised for political gain." Bondi, however, stood by her actions. In a series of public appearances, she defended the removal of these officials as necessary to restore integrity to the department. She argued that the DOJ had been tainted by bias and that these moves were essential to ensuring that the department could function without political influence from the previous administration. Despite her defense, the growing chorus of opposition made it clear that Bondi's tenure at the DOJ was becoming increasingly controversial. As resignations mounted and investigations into the department's actions ramped up, the administration found itself on the defensive, struggling to explain the rationale behind these sweeping changes. As the purging of DOJ officials continued under Pam Bondi's leadership, the political fallout only deepened. By the spring of 2025, the controversy surrounding the DOJ's actions had reached a boiling point. With each new revelation of politically motivated decisions and high-profile resignations, the Democrats in Congress ramped up their calls for a full investigation into the actions of Bondi and the Trump administration. In response to the growing uproar, the House Judiciary Committee convened a special hearing to examine the DOJ's activities under Bondi. The hearing was packed with lawmakers, journalists, and public officials, all eager to uncover the truth behind the recent wave of dismissals, reassignments, and political interference. The public's trust in the justice system was at an all-time low, and the committee aimed to get to the bottom of the crisis. The hearings began with opening statements from both sides of the aisle, each making their case for what was happening inside the DOJ. Democratic lawmakers were unequivocal in their condemnation of the department's actions, with many arguing that the institution's credibility had been irreparably damaged. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in her impassioned statement, likened the DOJ's current state to a banana republic, where the rule of law was subverted for political advantage. The Department of Justice is supposed to protect the people, not serve as a tool for political retribution, Ocasio-Cortez declared. What we're seeing today is a DOJ that is unrecognizable from the one I took an oath to defend. Republicans, on the other hand, rallied behind Pam Bondi, defending her actions as necessary to clean up the corruption within the DOJ. Representative Jim Jordan, a staunch Trump ally, asserted that Bondi was simply doing what needed to be done to restore the department's integrity. He argued that the previous DOJ had been overly politicized, particularly under former Attorney General William Barr, and that Bondi's leadership was a necessary correction. She is making tough decisions that are in the best interest of this country, Jordan said. The fact that she is standing up to the entrenched political forces in the DOJ should be celebrated, not criticized. Despite the partisan divide, the hearing quickly turned contentious. Democratic lawmakers pushed for a full investigation into the dismissal of DOJ officials and the alleged political interference in ongoing cases. They called for the appointment of a special prosecutor to oversee the DOJ's actions under Bondi and ensure that the department was operating without bias. As the hours dragged on, witnesses were called to testify. Some of them, including former DOJ officials, provided damning accounts of what they described as a politically charged environment within the department. One former prosecutor, Thomas Sullivan, detailed how he was reassigned from a high-profile case investigating Trump's business dealings after raising concerns about the political nature of the investigation. I was told directly that my involvement in the case was becoming a problem, Sullivan testified. When I asked for clarification, I was informed that I was being removed to avoid the perception of bias. But the reality was that the case was becoming too politically sensitive. The administration didn't want it to go any further. Sullivan's testimony sent shockwaves through the room. It was a clear indication that the DOJ had been working under significant political pressure, with cases being manipulated to serve the interests of the president. His account added weight to the growing narrative that the DOJ had been turned into a tool of the Trump administration's political agenda. For the Democrats, this was the smoking gun they had been waiting for. They saw Sullivan's testimony as evidence that Bondi had not only politicized the department but had also obstructed justice in the process. They immediately called for her resignation and demanded that the investigation into the DOJ's actions be expanded to include the involvement of President Trump. As the hearings concluded, the political fallout from Trump's orders to Pam Bondi to reshape the Department of Justice continued to reverberate across the country. What had started as a series of seemingly innocuous decisions had spiraled into a full-scale political and legal firestorm. The Department of Justice, once seen as an independent body committed to upholding the law, was now mired in accusations of corruption, political interference, and partisanship. In the aftermath of the hearings, President Trump and his administration remained defiant. Despite the mounting pressure and widespread calls for Pam Bondi's resignation, Trump continued to offer his unwavering support for his attorney general. In a series of public statements, he reiterated that Bondi was simply doing her job by cleaning up the mess left by previous administrations and ensuring that the DOJ operated without bias or political influence. But the political opposition was relentless. Congressional Democrats, having gained further momentum after the testimony of former DOJ officials, immediately called for legal action to be taken against Bondi and any other individuals involved in the alleged politicization of the department. Calls for impeachment proceedings against Bondi grew louder, with some members of Congress proposing that she had violated the public trust and undermined the very foundations of the justice system. Amidst these calls for accountability, several legal challenges began to emerge. Civil rights groups, legal advocacy organizations, and even former DOJ officials filed lawsuits alleging that the Trump administration's actions had infringed upon the constitutional separation of powers and violated the integrity of the legal system. These lawsuits sought to challenge the removal of DOJ officials, the dismissal of cases, and the political interference that had come to define the department under Bondi's leadership. One such lawsuit was filed by the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, which argued that the purging of DOJ staff based on political loyalty represented a direct threat to the rule of law. The ACLU's legal team contended that such actions were unconstitutional as they violated the principles of justice and fairness that the department was supposed to uphold. "This is not a matter of political opinion," said ACLU attorney Maria Delgado. "This is about whether we as a nation are going to stand by the fundamental principle that justice should be blind to politics. What we are witnessing here is the breakdown of that principle in real time." As these legal battles unfolded, President Trump's approval ratings began to dip. The controversy surrounding the DOJ, combined with the mounting legal challenges, created an increasingly negative narrative for the administration. While Trump's supporters remained fiercely loyal, the broader public grew more skeptical of his ability to lead the country through a legal crisis of this magnitude. The 2024 presidential election, now less than a year away, loomed large over these developments. For many, the events surrounding the DOJ's politicization became a key issue in the race. Democrats seized on the controversy as a way to rally their base, framing the crisis as a direct assault on the American justice system. President Trump, meanwhile, continued to rally his supporters by framing the attacks against Bondi and his administration as part of a broader political witch hunt designed to undermine his leadership. The situation reached a boiling point when the issue of the DOJ's integrity became a central topic in the first presidential debate of 2024. Democratic nominee Joe Biden and other key figures within the party pointed to Bondi's leadership as a prime example of why the DOJ needed to be restored to its independent function. "The DOJ is the cornerstone of our democracy, and what we've seen under this administration is a direct assault on its independence," Biden said during the debate. "If we're going to move forward as a nation, we need to restore integrity to the rule of law. We need to ensure that no one is above the law, no matter who they are." The Trump campaign, in turn, accused the Democrats of trying to distract from their own issues by focusing on the DOJ. Trump's supporters argued that Bondi was simply doing what was necessary to ensure that the DOJ didn't fall victim to the same political gamesmanship that had plagued it under previous administrations. As the months progressed, the legal battles continued to unfold, with some observers predicting that the controversy surrounding the DOJ would be a defining issue in the 2024 election. The question remained, would the American people accept the idea that the DOJ could be politicized in the name of loyalty to a president, or would they demand a return to a more impartial system of justice?